Hello everybody and welcome to Crushing Comics Live to talk about the comics out on the 23rd of June 2021. I'm your host, Krisis with a K. I'm coming to you live from New Zealand. And it is noon here, but it is some other time where you are. And this is the show where I recap all of the polls of last week. And guess what? I pull a lot of comic books. I think officially I pulled over 50 comics last week, and I put in a marathon session of reading them so I could talk about them all with you. We'll also talk about a couple of my picks for polls of the week for next week, my top 10 comics. I might play a song. There's lots of content in store here on the show. But before I get started, I want to share with you my opening thoughts, which is what I've decided to call my moment of crisis. And the moment of crisis today is about writers and artists in comics. We hear a lot the writer of said run, Al Ewing's Sword, Al Ewing's Immortal Hulk, and also runs by people other than Al Ewing. It's easy to talk about an author's run because the author tends to stay consistent, but on a big two series from Marvel or DC, the artist does tend to change. But it doesn't make it any less their run. But I think that continues to be reflected when we talk about books critically. We talk about comics as if the writer, everything sprung forward from their mind without any care as to the artists, the color artists, and the letterers in the comics. I really try to combat that because I really understand that comics are the function of everybody on the creative team working together. I think for some people, because it's easy to look at the writing, it's easy to talk about the plot, some folks maybe are a little bit scared of talking about all of the art, and so they don't want to get into, well, I think the artist did this. You know, you're afraid to say something other than, I thought the pictures were pretty, or they weren't. But we shouldn't let that fear that we have of ourselves as critics get in the way of crediting the full team. I really love when there's a lettering balloon that's like easy to read. That's a great reason to say, hey, I really like the letters on this book. Or when you notice that, you know, the colors are especially vivid, or even if they're really washed out in a way that gives you a certain feeling. Talk about the colors. I think when we all lean into talking about all of the parts of the craft that we each find appealing, we find power in talking about it, and we get to credit more than just the writer. So that's been our moment of crisis for today. Since it's the one of the last polls of the month, I actually want to start with something new today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with all the fancy technology that we figured out last week. And I'm going to talk about my top 10 books of 2020 so far. Really, it starts in November of last year because we know all the top whatever of the year lists end in November, so I start from November. So I'm going to give myself a minute on our countdown clock here and talk about my top 10 reads of the year. At number 10, we have Philadelphia from Image by Rodney Barnes and Jason Shaw and Alexander. I'll be talking more about it this week. There was a great issue. At number 9, I have brand new in my top 10, Shadow Man. This is from Valiant. I pick up everything from Valiant. And again, this was a book that was out this week, so we'll hear a little bit more about it later. At number 8, I have Daredevil by Chip Zdarsky and Marco Cicchetto. I love this comic book. It's the pinnacle of thoughtful superhero, and it's exciting every month. At number 7, I have Iron Man by Christopher Cantwell, much of the art by Cafu and the colors consistently by Frank Darmatta. This has been a great, thoughtful Iron Run, maybe the best one we've had in like a decade or more. At number 6, I have Iron Fist, Heart of the Dragon. This is already wrapped up by Larry Hama and Dave Watchter. Fantastic return to Iron Fist and sets him in an interesting place. I'm going to run out of time. Gosh, what number am I on? 5, Shadow Doctor from Aftershock, a great actual true story about a doctor in mob-era Chicago who cannot get hired by white hospitals because he's black. Number 4, oh, I'm out of time, but maybe we discovered I can't do that in a minute. I'll quickly go through these other ones. 4, The Other History of the DC Universe by John Ridley and team. It's actually prose, but it's about the continuity of the DC Universe. Number 3, Sandman the Dreaming. That's in the list for today, so we'll talk about it more. Number 2, we have The Picture of Everything Else. This is in turn of the century Paris, exploring art and the relationship between art, critic, and reality. It's really cool and different. I'm a huge fan. And my number 1 book of the year so far still remains Batman by James Tynion, and with a lot of the art by George Jimenez, although this one the cover I picked happened to have art by Gillian March. A fantastic title. I never thought I'd be saying that Batman was my favorite comic book, but here we are. So that's my top 10 as it stands right now. I want to take a look in the chat and see who we've got. J-Rock, one of my friends that I talk to all the time on the Omnibus Collectors group on Facebook. I see Jeff here. And Max, great that you can make it. Max shared this really awesome piece of music with me the other night that I was playing on a loop as I was dozing off. It's got an awesome noir vibe. So now we are going to talk about all my pulls from last week. And y'all, there's so many. I pulled, I think, officially 56 comics, but some of them were not available in digital right away. So we're not going to talk about those. So the timer is going to be critical this week. And I think I'm going to actually try to beat the timer sometimes, but I am going to put it on a loop so that it'll just keep rolling because, oh my goodness, do we have a lot to talk about. Oh, and let me just get those up on the screen. I think part of the reason we had such a big week is DC is not putting out really anything this week. I think because it's a 5-release month, and so they moved a lot of the things that would have come out in this week to be last week. So they had a total of over 15 books out last week, which for DC is a phenomenally large week. Okay, let me get that shared. And here we go. All right. First up, we have Superman in Action Comics, and actually it's a little bit confusing to talk about this because it was out the same week as Superman, and both are by Philip K. Johnson. This is my favorite of the two. It's because it has a little bit of a bigger in scope story, and Sam Pierre's art on it is just absolutely stunningly gorgeous. And also the colors, I have to say. So Daniel Sam Pierre's art and Adriano Lucas, one of my favorite colorists. This run has been really interesting because it's about some refugees who come to Earth, but they're speaking Kryptonian, but they're not from Krypton, or at least so far as Superman and Lois can tell, but they also kind of portend a much huger threat. It's big, it's bold, it's got great art, it's using Superman and John in a really great way, and it features a lot of the other members of the Justice League in a pleasing way here too. I think of the two, this is probably the one to be following, and it seems, I think one of them is relaunching, Superman is relaunching, to be a John Kent focused title. Next we have Batman Reptilian. This is a Black Label book. It is by Garth Ennis with art by Liam Sharp, and I think we have to start with the art. This is this very creepy, airbrushy Liam Sharp art. It's a little bit more reflective of the work that he would do in the UK and things like Heavy Metal in 2000 AD. He did do some of this work on Green Lantern. It's strange. It's an acquired taste. As is this book. It's a very dark view of Batman. It does not fit anywhere in current continuity. It has his whole rogues gallery. Here you can see Poison Ivy's in the rogues gallery. We have Alfred alive, so it's not a must read if you're keeping up with current DC. I found it a little bit overly grim, but I'm not always a huge Ennis fan, so it kind of just felt like, oh boy, bad things are happening, people are getting murdered. It felt like very back to the late 80s Gotham where kind of everything is dire, and if you like that, and if you like Ennis, and if you like the style of art from Sharp, it is probably going to land for you just fine. Next we have Batman Superman. This is by Gene Lang and a whole fleet of artists because it has a different amount of flashbacks to a different number of Earths that have a different number of Superman and Batman, and you can probably already tell that I am bored with this because I don't really do alternate Earth stuff. It just doesn't click for me. If this was not 1 or 2 issues away from the end of this title, it's already been announced to be ending, I would probably be a drop for me. Gene Lang has such an amazing scope as an author, but just bouncing around from Earth to Earth and different versions of Superman and Batman, it's just not really clicking for me. Maybe that would click for you if you like that. It's lighthearted, it's fun, it's playing with the idea of, you know, entering into stories and each alternate universe being a story. Maybe that's for you, but it has not, unfortunately, been for me. Next, we have the first issue of Bendis's Checkmate. This is by Brian Bendis and Alex Maleev. That is it's very dizzying, Steranko sort of checking credits page there. This is, in a way, an extension of his Event Leviathan, and already I know we're getting a little bit of a sad trombone for some of us, because Event Leviathan kind of was a pile of nothing. This is also kind of a pile of nothing. It's a really cool collection of characters, but they're just doing a lot of business talk. There maybe is a mystery. It might be about how Leviathan is over, but it still kind of has some power. It really just didn't have a cohesive hook to it, even though it was very, very pleasant to look at. But these are the characters I want to see Bendis writing. I want him to write Green Arrow. I want him to write Lois Lane. And so I'm hoping this is going to tick up. I'm hanging on. I'm not checking out yet. Let me just take a breath there and see who's joined us in chat. Hayden, welcome to chat. And Super Simi, I am doing well. I'm staying safe. Everything is fine here in New Zealand, except for it hailed overnight. Here in Wellington, we really don't get a lot of icy weather. It's really unusual for it to get all the way to freezing. So that was a strange thing to have overnight. But of course, nothing compared to the apocalyptic weather many of you are facing across the United States. Hey, Josh, I'm so happy that you made it. All right, back to DC here, and we move on to Mariko Tamaki's Detective Comics. I've been a little softer on this run, only because it started out with Dan Moore's art, which I was addicted to, and this issue and the last issue has, Victor Bogdanovich pencils, but I do think that the different inks from Daniel Henriquez really kind of lifted it a little bit. My major complaint about Victor Bogdanovich's pencils, and it's hard to show here, is that, because it's ink, maybe someone else, is I don't always like his line weights. They seem so small and scant that sometimes I lose them a little bit on the page. Sometimes they even look like they alias a little bit on the page, which is like on a computer when you turn something slightly to the side and it can't quite draw the straight line and it's like a little bit crisp on the edges. That's aliasing. And I always feel that way about his pencils, but I do think the other inker gave it a little bit of like a bolder, beefier look here. It's continuing a great mystery story in Gotham about a series of murders that Batman really cannot get to the bottom of. And it also has a really good backup story, also by Tamaki, but the backups serve this great thing where they're plugged into the actual action of the issue, just expanding one character we spent a little bit of time with. So super, super cool. All right, I actually used all my time on that one. Is it going to loop? I tried to set it up to loop. Yes, here we go. I just have to make the little end, the blinking less. Okay, woo. Sandman Universe, The Dreaming Waking Hours. This is in my top 10 of the year. This is a brilliant title. Even if you never have read Sandman before, if Sandman is threatening to you, you can pick up right from the beginning of this maxi series with issues 1, and it's going to make all the sense it's going to make to you. Like, the things that are Sandman Universe-y things are hints at things that people know, but they're not required to understand it well. It starts with one person who's stuck in a dream, and it kind of develops into people who've got to go into the dreams to fix some wrongs that are right. The art here by Nick Robles and colors by Matthew Lopez are just absolutely astounding. And we're deep into the court of Titania and Oberon here as they are fighting over their fiefdom of fairy and how that affects the dreaming. I feel like some people have been kind of soft on this, not only because it's not by Gaiman, but because also it's not like core to the dreaming the way Cy Spurrier's run was. Dream does show up here, but I cannot recommend this highly enough. It is absolutely gorgeous. It's so thoughtful. It is one of my favorite comics every single month. Next up, we have Harley Quinn. It takes a little too long to loop for my tastes. Okay. Next up, we have Harley Quinn. This is by Stephanie Phillips and Rossmo. What is his first name? Riley Rossmo. On art with colors from Ivan Placencia. I really like Stephanie Phillips. Every month I'm reading more stuff from Stephanie Phillips that makes me really think that she is going to be one of the next superstars of writing. I like what she's doing with Harley Quinn here, which is kind of threading this needle where Harley Quinn is asking herself, well, if I'm not Mr. J's gal, and I'm certainly not one of the Bat Kids, what am I? How do I exist in Gotham? Unfortunately, this particular story basically is her just having that internal monologue as she walks down the block. I mean, this issue, it's real scant on other details. But I also appreciate that Riley Rossmo's kind of squeezed his art into a slightly more formal shape. They all do have heads shaped like kidney beans, which is a mark of Rossmo's art, but this is actually a pretty tight set of pencils for him, and I find that it's a little easier to follow. This book is silly, and the pencils can get wacky in some instances, but I need them to be a little bit tight for these monologues. Okay, next we have Infinite Frontier. This one is really interesting because it's maybe kicking off kind of the next bold chapter of the DC universe. I don't know. I also don't know a lot about the DC multiverse, but this actually makes it kind of digestible, I have to say. I'll point out there's no credits block in this issue. Poor form, DC. How am I going to know who the letterer is if you won't credit the letterer on the title, on the cover, and there's no credits block? So this has art by Xermanico, who I love. It's basically saying there's something going wrong. It's going wrong in a cascading way across the different multiverse universes, but it's not a crisis, and they're actually in communication with each other now after Dark Knight's Metal. And so even though we have alternate superheroes like this one that are Justice incarnate, there's also a League of Villains, and there's also some heroes that we recognize from our Earth, and they're kind of all working together to unravel it. DC Multiverse, not my specialty, but it was interesting enough that I'm not in a hurry to drop it. I'm going to go through a few more, and then I will get back to you on your comments, which I love to see. Okay, because oh my gosh, there's so many this week. The Joker Puzzle Box. This is a digital chapter, so if you got DC Universe, you can read it there. It's by Matt Rosenberg. I have trouble with it just because it's hard to know where to place it. It's something about the Joker's being interrogated, the Riddler has been murdered, and how did that happen? So it exists in kind of like a weird nebulous space of DC continuity, but the cool thing here is that it's just got really great art and it has a very fun conversation between Riddler and Joker as they're kind of trying to psych each other out about who's really the funniest criminal in Gotham. I would not rush to read this. If you want to just wait until all the chapters are done, they'll probably put it out as a collection. I think that's fine, but so far it's interesting material. It'll be interesting to see as the puzzle box unfolds. Now we have Brian Bendis's Justice League with David Marquez, and also the backup feature of Justice League Dark with Ram V and Zermanico and on art. This is, I don't know why. Oh, I guess I couldn't really make it gosh, that's small. Anyway, I already said who created it. This issue... I've been really hot on this run. I actually like it. I've been waiting for Bendis to be on Justice League. I think it's a good idea. But this issue, it just feels like he had to fill space. Like it's basically the heroes retreating from Naomi's world where they were. And they're actually just like, it's a retreat, it's a retreat. And then they get back and they're like, did you retreat? I retreated. It's just one of those Bendis issues. But the backup feature, and then, it looks good because but Marquez is great. But the backup feature by Ram V with Zermanico and Fajardo Jr. on colors, whew, it is doing some crazy stretching of the medium stuff. It's very Animal Man. Like Constantine writes out this page. This is the page that he wrote, and they're walking across the page, having a conversation that's reflected in the script of the page. Really fun deconstructionist stuff in Justice League. Next up, we have Mr. Miracle. This was my pick of the week for DC last week, and oh my goodness, did it deliver. This book is on fire. I need you guys to check it out. Guys, gals, and MB folks, I need you all check it out because it is cool. Shiloh Norman is the Mr. Miracle here. He is a celebrity, as Mr. Miracles tend to be, but there's some question as to the nature of his celebrity and where he got all his secrets. He's also trying to have a personal life and date. He's also being attacked by, it's a spoiler, can I say it? I don't know, but a very familiar character if you read Tom King's Mr. Miracle. Also, the art is just out of this friggin' world. Rico Renzi on colors gives everything this blast of neon, and Fico Ossio on art. I mean, every page of this is just a stunner to look at. The letters from Rob Lee, there's a lot of variation in lettering. There's a suit that talks. There's people talking from different locations. It's all really easy to read. I have to say that for an underdog, a little book that could, this book is really delivering for me every month. I'm so excited to see the next one. All right, I'm going to load up my next set of issues, and I'm also going to see what y'all are talking about here. So let me go back to not sharing. Running super efficiently today. Okay, let's see who's chatting here. Happy to see that Josh made it. Maybe I've said that already, but I'm twice as happy to see Josh, I suppose. Jonah Pauls, I don't know anything about oh, hey, look at this magic power that I have. I don't know anything about Ruckus Checkmate. I have never read it. Actually, I read one issue this week for a Batman read that had Ruckus Checkmate in it, and I was like, ooh, here's a thing I don't know anything about. Well, thank you so much for tuning in from Brazil, Fabio. Bendis on Spider-Man, I don't know, man. He seems like he's really dug in at DC, and I want him to do good work at DC. This new rotating writer cast on Spider-Man should be pretty cool. Hayden is digging this Harley run. I actually weirdly loved the Humphreys run. It's a topic for another time, but I really do like the voice that Stephanie Phillips is giving her. I have no critiques on that. All right, folks, I know some more of you have chatted, but we got to keep it up because I can't emphasize enough how many books there are this week. Luckily, we are already almost through the DC pulls. Let me get them back up on screen and we will go. I'm having that same thing that happened last week where every time I open them, my computer's like, are you sure you want to open that many things at once? Can I possibly talk you out of it? But we will persist. Okay. This is Robin by Joshua Williamson, and on art we have Gleb Melnikov and Louis Guerrero on colors with letters from Troy P. Terry. I'm seeing a lot of people on Twitter say that this is their favorite DC book, which honestly, I can't blame you. I mean, I love Batman. It's holding a special place in my heart. But after Batman and Mr. Miracle and Black Label stuff like The Waking Hours, this really might be my top one after those. The thing is, it's a tournament arc, and either you love them or you don't. Either you watch cartoons and movies that had tournament arcs and you dig that kind of thing, or you don't. And I'm kind of in the middle. By itself, a tournament arc does not hold enough allure for me that it's enough. But this has some interesting connections to Damien's past, to his connection to Ra's al Ghul, to his connection to other young characters around DC. It's bringing back Connor Hawke. I have no idea who that is because I'm not a longtime DC reader, but people seem pretty excited about it. I can say that it's a recommend. I don't know if it's so hot and so amazing that it's a recommend must read every month. I think the first collection will be a lot of fun. Moving on, now we have Superman. I told you both Superman titles were out this week. This, I cannot say anything positive for this arc. It really feels stretched out. It spends so much time on just these sequences of... It's giving us this whole history of this planet. I can't tell if we've been to this planet really before in continuity or it's just being made up as we go, but it is definitely boring for me. There's a shadow monster. He lives in their hearts. I don't know. I will admit that I do like the art by Scott Godlewski. I always love Scott Godlewski's art. And Gabe Eltaeb is providing fantastic colors here, but it's just a snooze. And this page, I think, is representative of it. Like, what's even happening? It's a rib cage, there's a heart beating, but who cares? Use your pages better. So I'm kind of happy this is ending. It feels like it's just filling time until Tom Taylor takes over on the new Superman book. So now we have Teen Titans Academy. This has been threading a very interesting needle, doing the Teen Titans that we all know as the original cast, the recent Teen Titans cast, and then a bunch of new characters all at once. And I think the needle has been threaded decently up until this issue. It stars the Bat Pack. I don't remember these characters at all. They're apparently from something. I don't know if they were from a Wonder Comics book or the We Are Robin book. I've stretched my memory, but I clearly never looked it up. It's okay. I think it really rests on the laurels of Steve Lieber as an artist here. And I have to remark some pretty dang good colors from Dave Stewart. I mean, you could expect nothing less from Dave Stewart. But these are silly characters investigating who Red X is. It doesn't really add a lot to the characters. I think the other issues before this have cemented the new cast members well enough that I didn't need this kind of tour through them from the perspective of three characters I also don't know to get to know them better. I know it's going to hit the spot for a lot of people, but for me, it was just kind of a Hello, Leslie. Welcome aboard to the stream today. This is Truth and Justice. It's a digital chapter. I'm just going to talk about it briefly. Truth and Justice is presenting 3 digital chapters that are pretty brief, and then they get released as a physical comic book. So I'm just reading them digital as they come because I read everything digital. This one really didn't work for me. The art style is this very kind of almost Teen Titans Go art style, but it has all the Bat family together and it has Alfred alive, so it feels like it's just in this different cartoon continuity, and it just never really clicked for me. That's all I really need to say about it. Now we come to Wonder Woman, which I think is the end of my DC pulls. Oh, well, there's 2 on. Oh boy, I'm having some internet troubles, aren't I? Well, we're going to just forge through here. I'm sure you'll all tell me if it gets too laggy. This Wonder Woman run, it looked amazing. And I can forgive an amnesiac plot because that was, if she knew who she was and she was in Asgard, it would have played really differently. Now she kind of has her memory back, and now she's in Olympus, but the plot is just, it's going nowhere. And this Andy McDonald art, it's very kind of steep and angular, which is a great look for Olympus. It's not a good look for Diana. So it really kind of just hangs there. I don't understand what we're doing. So it kind of is failing in every regard for me, and Wonder Woman is my favorite character, so I don't really know what's happening here, and I'm having a lot of trouble getting into it. But finally, on the DC pulls, we have Wonder Woman Black and Gold. Now, this is one of DC's color-limited anthology series that they've been running over the course of the past year, and I can't say that I recommend it. honestly, it's some Wonder Woman stories, but it's not doing anything groundbreaking with Wonder Woman. Honestly, if you're looking for brief Wonder Woman stories, this was done so much better by her digital series last year. I think it was Sensational Wonder Woman. None of these stories are memorable, and almost all the stories in that book were memorable, except the Becky Cloonan story, which is interesting because she's the one co-writing this current Wonder Woman run that I'm kind of soft on. But this is a story about Wonder Woman's lasso being tied to the mythological fates and how that story interacts. I thought it was really clever. It looked really good, but I don't think this is a book I can recommend until you can just read it for free effectively on digital when it hits DC Universe. Okay, that is our DC polls for the week. Not so bad. And I'm going to switch back to the main screen. StreamYard has been telling me that I'm moving a little slowly here. So if you're seeing some lag from me, definitely let me know. Let's see. You know, the new Superman movie is rumored to have perhaps a black Superman, and it's being, I think the script is being broken by Ta-Nehisi Coates. However, that doesn't mean it's based necessarily on that President Superman. I think that is one iteration of a black Superman that it certainly could contain, but it's not necessarily going to be the case. And for Mr. Miracle, I found it really easy to get into. I have never read any Shiloh Norman material ever before in my life. And it totally works for me. There was nothing confusing about it. It presents its own self-contained world, and when a comic book does that, it's really easy to follow. So I have not had any problems following it at all. And DC sometimes does lose me, because I don't really have a history with DC. Okay, we are going to move on to Marvel. Oh no, stream has stopped. That's no good. Let's see. Trying to do some live troubleshooting of the internet here. See if the stream bounces back. I seem to be able to load other websites. Let me know if there's any problems. I've switched to a different internet source in my house. So let me know if that goes better or badly for you. Okay, we're on to the Marvel books. And as a reminder, I read all of Marvel as long as it's in continuity. Here we go. So the Spider-Man run, it's almost over. We only have a few more issues left by Nick Spencer. And, you know, I appreciate that he's trying to tie things. The overwhelming feeling I have is we're still just avoiding Spider-Man in this very strange way. This is really just about this villain monologue that's ongoing between the Chameleon and some other character's name I don't even remember, the Finisher, the Fixer, something. The Finisher, and Peter Parker's sister. It just feels like for a Spider-Man run, it's surprisingly disinterested in Spider-Man. Okay, we're going to move. Also, the art was really flat. We're going to move on to Captain Marvel. This Captain Marvel arc, it's doing this thing that Kelly Thompson's run keeps doing, which is playing with your expectations with the solicits and the cover and the topics, but then delivering something slightly different. So the expectation that it is setting is that that this Carol needs magic. But the reason she needs magic is because of what she saw in her last arc. So it's actually part of the ongoing arc of this whole series, even though you can enjoy it on its own. In this issue, she cannot get Doctor Strange to help her, despite that cover. And so she turns to the Enchantress, which has some challenges, because Enchantress is connected to the reason that she does need the magic to begin with. They go on a really fun adventure. This art, it trends a little bit young readers for me. It's just like a little plain, a little ultra glossy, which is fine, but it felt a little tonally off. And the story, it was very fine. This really feels like a Captain Marvel book that you can hand to anybody of any age who knows her from the movie or not. And that's great, but it's not in my like, wow, oh my gosh, you've got to go read it now category. I did not read Fantastic Four Life Story because I don't read Alternate Universe, and also Mark Russell really is just boring me lately, but that's not our topic here, so we're going to move on to Gamma Flight. This is a spin-off from the Immortal Hulk run by Al Ewing, but we've got him co-writing here with Crystal Frazier and with Lan Medina on art with Antonio Fabella doing colors. This, unfortunately, gets really stuck in needing to re-establish who Gamma Flight is for people who have maybe not been reading Immortal Hulk for like 3 years now. And so if you have been reading Immortal Hulk, I do think it's going to come off a little dull to you, because it's kind of like, yes, we know they're the former Alpha Flight, we know some of them are villains, we know they're tracking down Gamma mutates, but it really does have a wonderful connection between the team. And on the con side, though, it's just an extension of Incredible Hulk. Like, they're doing the same thing. It's not like an independent Gamma Flight adventure. They're just chasing down details that maybe Ewing just didn't have time to finish in Immortal Hulk. It was one of my top picks for the week. I don't know if it got quite to that hype, but I'm still interested, and I think it was well crafted. Next up, we have Guardians of the Galaxy, number 15 by Al Ewing with one for Jerry on art with Federico Blee on colors. This pretty much was an X-Men B-side. Like, if you're not reading Sword, I don't know why you would read this issue. It barely accomplishes anything for the Guardians. It's mostly a sister book to Sword this week. It has a pretty fun confrontation between Star-Lord, Nova, and Magneto that makes a lot of sense if you've read a lot of the space side of Marvel. So for that, I give it some credit, and the art was great. It does, at the end, resolve what was happening on the planet that we saw in Guardians of the Galaxy 14. So it does have a little bit of a reward, but it feels like an issue you probably could have easily skipped if you weren't interested in keeping up on this month to month. I didn't read Heroes Return because it's an alternate universe. I'll probably read it all in one shot when it hits Marvel Unlimited, but I'm not going to follow it month to month. Next, we have Marvel Voices Pride. We broke this down on our podcast this week because it was 57% mutants or more, depending on how you count. But I found it to be a lot of fun. I think there have been a lot of very valid critiques on the internet that if you are going to have one of these Pride issues, are you really doing right by the characters you're taking pride in all year round? And that's not just for Pride Month and LGBTQA Pride, it's also for when you do an Indigenous Voices Pride or an African American History Month Pride. Are you actually serving these characters year round, or are you just taking pride in them for the marketing dollars? The thing that was positive for me is, of these characters, there's 12 stories, 11 of them have characters that have appeared in issues every single month over the past 6 months. That to me means that Marvel is walking the talk of their representation. On the negative side, a lot of those characters are from X Factor, which was just canceled. So there's no best, there's no perfect, there's only progress. And I think a lot of these stories were interesting. They used characters that I love, and I would like to keep progressing to see more of them all year round. And I do have a little bit of art by that, but time's up, so we're just going to fly right by. There's some art from the Prodigy story, which I think was my favorite. Next up is Reptile. Is it Reptile? 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 I don't know what I'm supposed to be getting pronunciation-wise. Terry Bloss has come to the Marvel Universe with, I have to say, a really fresh, fun, innocent voice for this hero and his cast. This feels very much like a young reader's graphic novel that has just been segmented into 5 issues. It doesn't really comfortably fit into an issue-by-issue story. It's silly. The art kind of is more concerned with landing the emotion or the joke than having this hyper-realistic superhero look, and that's fine. These characters are really charming, and we're exploring a little bit where the powers of Reptile's amulet come from and how that maybe connects to his disappeared parents. I like seeing smaller characters get focus, and I think this is a book that really will play well to like the 9 to 14-year-old readers who maybe aren't into the grimdark stuff and still like fun, bouncy comics. This is a definite checking out on Marvel Unlimited, though. You don't need to be reading it month to month. Silk, which I have been so high on. It was getting close to my top 10. It just didn't get there. This issue, it gets too obsessed with this flashback story explaining the villain. I think the villain was already explained. I already understood her. But Silk is barely in this issue. We see the villain having a fight that is so repetitive. Like, she's doing this Yondu beat on this page. She has a knife. It's flying around like an arrow. It kills a lot of people. But that happens for like 4 pages. And then we get a flashback of her origin, and that happens for like 8 pages. It just wasn't a Silk issue. And I think it was just a tactical error by author Maureen Gu to need to explain this much stuff this late in the game. I think it's only a 5 or 6 issue series, and she's just not using her time wisely. So I still highly recommend this, but it kind of felt like a little bit of a rookie error, at least a rookie in monthly comics. I'm sure she's very accomplished. I don't know her from other work, but in terms of monthlies, felt like a rookie error. Okay, next we have Darth Vader in The War of the Bounty Hunters. This Darth Vader book, if you love Darth Vader, even if you have not read comic book Darth Vader, I really urge you to go read the first 6 issues of this Greg Pak run. It is the best Vader story I've ever read. It was one of my top comics of last year. It was incredible. Then we kind of hit a dip because the Emperor like basically disassembles Vader, and we get him trying to put himself back together, and it just gets a little indulgent in the amount of time it spends with it. Now he's back together, and he's mad, but he maybe does or maybe doesn't have the Emperor's support. And this is kind of steering into tying into this War of the Bounty Hunters about trying to get the frozen Han Solo and take possession of him. It's fine. I can't recommend it on its own. The art is amazing, but I mostly am going to recommend that you go back and read those first 6 issues. Now we have Sword, which of course we talked about at length on This Week in X. This really feels like the title that is living up to the Highwire act of this Hickman era the best. It has the biggest ideas, it has the biggest ramifications, but is it too slow? It's not a mutant book and that it's all about mutants. It's about the galactic perspective on Earth as seen through mutants, because they're the ones that are taking a step. It really is a sister or sibling book to Guardians of the Galaxy in that way. I think for some people it's probably a little slow, but especially this one, which just deals with the ramifications of the Hellfire Gala and the fireworks from the Hellfire Gala. But the artwork from Valerio Schiti, we learned to say it, is fantastic, and Marta Gracia's colors. But this is a very talky issue. I think if you were waiting to pick this up or try it out, the next issue is the place to start, because it's when it's going to break free. Even though it's kind of part of the Guardians event that's coming up, it's not going to be a direct crossover. It's a tie-in. So you don't have to worry about King of Black. You don't have to worry about the Gala. I think we're just going to get to see Sword being Sword, and that will be fun. Next up we have, next up I need to open another window because my computer complained about it. Well, that's good. I always need to take a breath. And also, did I bring any water with me today? No. So this is going to get a little dicey at some point. All right, let's open up another window of preview here. Just think, I have all of my indie books left over, and we are flying through these. After I get through these last couple of Marvel ones, I'll take a look at what y'all have been talking about in the chat. Okay. Let's see. Here we go. Only a few more from Marvel. And I really am having trouble using my mouse right now, if you're wondering why we're just sitting here. All right. Here we go. Okay. Wave X number 3. This caused a lot of division on the comic book internet last week. Spurrier is doing the same thing that he was doing on Constantine here, which is really taking a look at the themes of what it means to live on Krakoa. The thing is, with Constantine, he was taking a pretty live run at the actual issues of present-day Britain, including Brexit things, including political things, including things with the monarchy. Here he's working in an entirely fabricated culture. And in doing that, he's almost kind of got to make up a straw man of problems to respond to in a different way than he did in Hellblazer. And for some people, it's working better. And for some people, it's working not. And I personally think it has to do with how much of yourself you've already put into Krakoa. If you're really sure what you think Krakoa is, how you think mutants would be reacting, I could see this falling a little flatter because you're not vibing with the thing that Spurrier is defining. But if you've been waiting for somebody to define it, it is exciting. I'm not reading Web of Spider-Man because it has him in, I think, high school, so I don't think it's a continuity comic. And then we have Wolverine. The weird thing about this issue of Wolverine is it was a critical issue of X-Force. It resolves specific plot threads from X-Force. So if you have been reading X-Force, you really needed to read this issue of Wolverine. And if you've been reading Wolverine, you don't really need to read this issue of Wolverine, which is strange. And if you want to hear me talk more about it, go check out This Week in X. We also here have X-Men Legends number 4. This is inserting a story between issues 42 and 43 of X Factor. There were more interesting things to do between issues 42 and 43 of X Factor. If you really like Walt Simonson's art, it's a little bit of a treat, but I just think that it didn't hit with the amount of density that makes me love that issue. I'm actually up to that very issue in our read in our house, and I love that era of X Factor. But Simonson's writing a much denser script. That's Louise Simonson, and when Walt pencils, he's penciling in a much more paneled way that just puts more stuff on the page. So it's just falling a little bit flat for me, and I can't say that I recommend it again. Fun to read on Marvel Unlimited some other time. Whew. Okay, we're going to move on to indie books now, but first let me see what's going on in the chat. The stream came back. That's good. Self-contained universe. Yeah, I understand why people like self-contained universes, but here's the thing for me. I read such a wide amount of comic books, as you're seeing on this program, that it's not enough for me to read a self-contained universe book and for it to be mid. If I'm going to read a self-contained universe book, it has to be killer. And so I think when books are not self-contained universe and they're a little bit more in a shared universe, I'm willing to put in a little bit more suspension of my critical thought because I'm like, okay, well, at least I'm getting some additional fun in this shared universe right now. So I think that's why I skip alternate universes, because if I'm going to read an AU comic, it's got to be as good as the best indie comic, and most of them aren't. So why spend that time? Whereas when things are in a shared universe, I'm willing for it to be not as great. Peter Parker's sister is not a brand new thing. It's actually from the Family Business original graphic novel, which is from the Marvel Now era, and she's been kind of occasionally used in the main title since then, but that's the one you want to take a look at to find out how or who she is. You know, it's interesting, this Anil as a bartender thing that came up in Pride. Part of that is tied up with this very American conception of who gets to drink alcohol, and I've seen that across Marvel and DC in the past couple of weeks. The fact of the matter is you don't have to be 21 in a lot of countries, so I think that that's a very American perspective on if people should be around the liquor in the comic books or not. But also, I do think that it did a nice job of bridging the gap between this more childish, unsure Anil that we're getting in New Mutants and maybe a more developed Anil that we've seen in other books. I don't know that we need to see him as a bartender to feel that. It did grind for me a little bit, but I can make an exception for it there. I wish Angela would have just stayed anywhere. She's not anywhere right now. They didn't even use her in the Pride special. I mean, they mentioned her as one of their LGBTQI characters, but she wasn't even there. So I wish she stayed in Thor 2. And we'll talk about sadness about X Factor sometime later. Yeah, musical interlude would just make it harder for me to talk because I would wind up singing. So I think we're going to press on. I do really want to sing for you at the end. Spoilers. I think I'm going to do the song that you hear at the beginning of all my videos because the lyrics sound like I wrote them about the last scene in Sword this week, so we'll get into that later. We're going to do Image and indie books now, and there are so many. So many. So I'm going to try to be fast, and if I start going way faster than the counter, we'll just do away with the counter, but I'm going to use the counter to begin with. I actually don't read Ascender anymore. I thought since the show is new, I maybe could talk about the books that I've dropped, and so I've dropped Ascender. It's, the first half, Descender, was about this universe that has a lot of skepticism about AI and robots and this one story in the middle of it with this one particular AI. It's fun, but Lemire comics to me can be kind of decompressed and a kind of little eye-rolly, like, yes, okay, we've done this plot, move forward. Ascender picks up long after that, and not that long, like half a generation after that ends, with a universe that has rediscovered magic. And I really like sci-fi with magic. Like looking at this cover, a dragon in space. Space dragons is like, yes, sold for me. All you need is a space dragon. But again, I just felt like it was kind of slow, kind of going in circles. I think I made it to issue 7 or 8. I think this is a fun one to binge, because I got to binge Descender all at once, and I was like, really into it. And then when I just switched to single issue reading for Ascender, I was just eye roll. So I would say wait and binge it rather than keep up month to month. Okay. Beckstar. This is from Mad Cave. Mad Cave is fun because it seems like they're really focusing on getting something really new and different from every comic book. This book, I just read it the other night. I read the first 2 issues. I am so obsessed with this comic book. It's probably going to be in my top 10 after they release the 3rd issue. It's just wild. The art has this kind of like slightly misshapen, kind of all ages readers comic look. It's almost like a little bit like Lumberjanesy in a way, but it's not an all ages book. The main character is kind of this woman, kind of Han Solo-esque character, but she's part of a quartet of mercenaries who discovered these secret artifacts, and every artifact does like a world-breaking, amazing thing, but it also comes with a cost. So it's like a Faustian bargain thing. And hers is a luck dagger, but when she uses it, other people maybe not so lucky. But this is about the other artifacts and what would happen if you get them all in one place. It is just so delightful. It moves. It doesn't spend too long defining the history of the characters, but it also doesn't give us no reason to care about them. To me, that is a perfect balance on a sci-fi book of original material. Next up, Bitter Root. This is actually a drop for me from a couple of issues ago, so I'm just going to talk briefly about why I dropped it. I was obsessed with this series when it started. It's kind of like a Harlem Renaissance vampire slayer family that are also dealing with demons from another dimension. The thing is, it just gets a little tangled sometimes. It doesn't do a good job of reminding us who the characters are or what they're doing or their purpose. It kind of gets into these fights that just wear on, and you get to the 3rd issue of the fight, and you're like, what was this fight about? And the art, I find also kind of hard to track. So I know it's a huge, popular book, but I don't hate it. I just found that I was reading issues, and after a while, I couldn't even remember why I was reading about these characters or what they were trying to achieve. And I like to give you my view of the negative side of a comic. If you like totally wild, neon, entangled, big cast Harlem Renaissance vampire hunters, you're going to like it. For me, it just eventually lost me. The Blue Flame is another one where I tried the first issue and it was a drop, but since I didn't get a chance to talk about it, I'll talk about it now. This is by Christopher Cantwell, who's writing Iron Man right now and wrote Doctor Doom at Marvel. His indie stuff is very different. He loves to play with this idea of seemingly divergent plots and seemingly unreliable narrators, and if they truly will come together or not. It's very, very peculiar. He did the same thing in the first issue. There's this one plot about this Blue Flame is this intergalactic hero. It's a lot like Strange Adventures from DC with Adam Strange. Then he's also in this team of vigilantes in Detroit who, for a minute, it seems like they're auto racers, but I think they're just at a car show, but they stop crime, but they're heroes, but they're not, but they're poor, but they're in relationships with each other. And then the issue ended, and I was like, but I don't know if I'm supposed to care about Blue Flame or not. Like, why? Why am I... Okay, great. You introduced me to space and to these vigilantes. Like, where are we going to go from here? And I couldn't tell, so I didn't pick up the second issue. I have a much higher standard this year than I did in previous years because my pull list is too big, y'all. Too big. Okay, now we get to one that I am reading. This is Chariot by Brian Edward Hill at Upshot, or at AWA Studios. I have to highlight the art on this by Priscilla Petrates. I don't know who she is, but she's blown me the hell away with colors from Marco Lesko. This book is a neon dream. I highly recommend it. It's probably my favorite book from AWA so far. It's Knight Rider. Are any of you old enough to remember Knight Rider? Did that have a kind of vintage comeback? I don't know. But it's basically a car that has an intelligence that talks, that has this guy who's kind of down on his luck and he's trying to save his son and he's on the outs with his ex. And so he adopts the car and the car adopts him. Very cool. However, Brian Edward Hill sometimes cannot help himself. And here he's trying to get in so many other cyberpunky kind of vibes. It kind of goes very Matrix for a while in this issue. The last issue is very Fast and Furious. I can appreciate a book that wants to go through a lot of different action styles, but I think it was a slightly stronger book when it was just doing Knight Rider. Again, the art, though, is so gorgeous that it really might be worth it just to read it for the art. Definitely plug in a note in your calendar to pick up the collection of this book. Dark Age by Red 5. I really like Red 5's comics. They do some really cool stuff, but they release their books digitally several weeks after they do physically, so I haven't had the chance to read this yet, but I will talk about it if I ever get the chance to. Days of Sand. Whew, this book. I don't always read Europe Comics. Europe Comics presents translated bande dessinée from the French market, graphic albums, to the United States market. They frequently will release them digitally in chapters first and then put them out as a book. So I usually scroll through the new ones and see if anything would appeal to me. This is a true-to-life, but still fictional, historical fictional story of a photographer who works for the American government in the Great Depression era. He's been sent to photograph the Dust Bowl, to document it and also make it real to people all around the country so they can get more funding and more support to try to rehabilitate these communities that the Depression has really wiped out. It's crushingly sad. We see people in really abject poverty, but it's really interesting because it's this New York photographer who's trying to understand how to relate to these people that live in Oklahoma and all they know is dust. Their farms have been ruined. They have no money. They're making leather stew and stone soup. And I just really loved it. It made me really emotional. It has some wonderful photography nerd stuff in it. The art is fantastic. It's all by the same creator. The art, the colors, the writing, the letters, Amy DeJong. The translation's great. It reads in a really fluid way. It's just really great. If you like this historical stuff, I know I'm over my minute. I don't care. I was really affected by it, and I highly, highly, highly recommend this comic. I can't wait. The second part, it's not on the schedule yet because it's digital. It's not like solicited in advance, but I actually looked at maybe picking up the French version of it. I read French, not great, but well enough that I can sometimes follow a comic book. I think I'll probably just wait for the English one, but I love reading different stuff like this. If you read stuff like this, recommend it to me. Like I'm really into historical fiction when it looks at, I don't know how to describe it, like a specific function or a specific job, or it's not just like some noir thing or some mobster, but it looks at some particular function of society and how it worked in some past time. That is always really attractive to me. Okay, good luck. This was a one and done drop for me. I was really excited about Matthew Erman because I read some of his early indie work and I thought I was really on board with him, but I have not really liked his last couple series. Doesn't mean he's not a great writer, just not really hitting for me. This story, it's an amazing concept. It's $1 million concept. And the art by Stefano Simeone is amazing. Basically, good luck and bad luck are personified. They've come to Earth and wherever they go, they shed good or bad luck. So if you're in the trail of good luck, things are happening for you that are great. Not only positive things, but avoiding negative things. And of course, the opposite happens with bad luck, right? Do you want to read this right now? Me too. Except the whole issue is about these unlucky kids. We don't know if they're unlucky because they're unlucky or because they cross path with bad luck or whatever. And they're in this training sequence. And it goes on, and you cannot follow the art. It is unfollowable for me. And then it turns out their trainings, they're going to go into the zone where the good and the bad luck collided and do something. If you have lightning in a bottle like this concept, why would you waste your whole first issue on a training sequence? Oh, part of me wants to hang on for another issue. Okay, I think we're back. The internet in New Zealand cannot always be relied upon, I've discovered. Okay. This is Grimm's Fairy Tales. Grimm Fairy Tales, again, I dig Xenoscope. They're taking myths and legends and just turning them into serialized superhero adventures, but this was not a strong point for them. The art, usually their art kind of relies on being really glossy and refined in a way that's consistent across every issue, but here the art was really struggling with the faces, the likenesses, it all felt really stiff, and it feels like they're kind of just like biding time until issue 50. They have this really cool plot where Sky, the protagonist, has lost her mentor in their book of myths and legends, and bad things keep coming out of the book, and so she's trying to balance the fighting of the bad things coming out of the book and the going into the book to try to solve things, but it feels like they maybe had like 4 issues of plot and they're trying to turn it into 6 issues, so I'm a little bit disappointed with them. Homesick Pilots is another one that was a drop for me, and I just want to talk about why. It's a pretty cool, pretty stylish book, but it's about this girl who goes to a haunted house and maybe dies there or maybe doesn't, and the house has had a lot of people die there, so it has ghosts in it, but the house uses the ghosts as weapons, and sometimes the house gets up and moves around like a mech, and if you think I'm spoiling things, this was all in the first couple pages of the first issue. It was scattered. I really don't like a comic that can't decide what it is. I think you've noticed as a theme across all these indie books, and I think this comic just is really having a hard time for me deciding, is it a giant mech book? Is it a ghost book? Is it a book about a band because they're in a band? And it's not doing any one of those things really well. And it's funny to me because a lot of people are like loving this comic, and I struggled. I struggled to get through issue 2, issue 3, issue 4, issue 5. I think it just goes to show there's a flavor for everybody, and there's a lot of people out here who this will hit for, but for me, it just never felt like it decided what it was going to be, and by the end of the 5th issue I was like, why would I want to read more from this? Okay, moving on. Mike Mignola is just really trying to expand this Hellboy verse lately, and it's a spin-off of a spin-off of a spin-off of a spin-off. This Imogen character is from Lady Baltimore, which is running right now. It also had an issue out this week, who is from Baltimore, which is a comic, which also has a connection to Hellboy. And I don't understand why this had to exist. I mean, I'm pretty angry, actually, that I not had to read it, but that I was like, oh, it's a Hellboy book, I'm going to read it. It's just her fighting some trolls. And it's not even a good story about trolls. It's not even a good story about her. The art was fine. It was good, I guess. But it went nowhere. This should have just been a flashback in Lady Baltimore. Like, why did you need a separate spinoff? Did you think this number 1 was going to sell so much better? I'm kind of angry about it. Next is Jonna and the Unpossible Monsters by Chris Samney. This is a drop for me. It's just too quick. It's really relying on how kinetic and beautiful Samney's art is, and it is those things. But it's about this little girl who's strong enough to punch giant monsters in this post-apocalyptic landscape in a kind of fantastical world where the monsters are marauding. And this whole issue is just a fight with one monster, and everybody heard that she can beat up monsters. Nobody believes her. So we got to watch this whole fight knowing that it's just going to end with her punching a monster and them all going. And then it does. I don't have the time, y'all. I'm reading like 50 plus books. You got to do better, especially for a book that literally, even if I look at all the lovely details of Chris Samnee's art, maybe takes me 3.5 minutes to read. I've put in 4 issues. It's not for me. But again, there are things in it for you to like. If you like Samnee's art, if you like a little kid against monsters thing, that's great. This just really strikes me as like a good YA book that would maybe go better if it was just packaged in OGNs. Okay. All right, Lighthouse. So there's this guy. His name is Brian Haberlin, and he does comics for Image's Shadow line. He basically puts out like 1 a year, generally. And they're all hyper, super, ultra, uncanny valley realistic. And they're usually all about space or something fantastical, although last year's wasn't. And I usually really just like them all. Sometimes the stiffness of the uncanny valley art doesn't always work for me, but this concept, it's a pretty cool concept. There's this lighthouse, literally out in the middle of space, I guess you can see it best here, that's just a platform, a way station to help people get through this section of space that has a lot of black holes, and has a skeleton crew. And what happens when 2 things arrive simultaneously? A group of space pirates, pardon me, and also a huge load of unconventional weapons that were maybe used against the space version of the Geneva Convention in the last war. And what happens if somebody on the station has a connection to those war and those weapons? I think it's pretty cool. I usually like this team of Haberlin and Hine, so I'm an easy mark. All right, now Philadelphia, one of my top 10 books of this year. Whew, wow, wow, wow. Can I just communicate this whole book to you in unintelligible noises? What to even say? So it starts out being like vampires in Philly. And you know what? I'm about it, man. Show me a bloody Philadelphia devoured by vampires. It's my hometown. I'm into it. But it turns into so much more. It leans into Philadelphia as the birthplace of America. It leans into the problems and the sins of history and how that plays out in the current day. But what would happen if some of these historical figures could reflect on their past sins? Because, spoiler, they're vampires. So it's like historical fiction in the present day with vampires. I'm so into it. And this issue, you can't read it by itself. It really is about all these characters we've been tracking and all of the kind of recriminations between them, both our present day human characters and our vampire characters. The art is so compelling. It's so shadowy. It makes me feel things. I love vampire stuff, but I love vampire stuff with a different twist, and Philadelphia is that. I was unable to read King Tank Girl out from Albatross because they are not releasing it day and date on digital. They seem to be releasing it like a 2 or 3 month lag to digital, but I do read Tank Girl, so I will probably catch up on the whole series once it all gets released, and that's what I'll do. Let's see. I know the timer's running, but we're not on time right now. Oh, I gotta start a new window. Okay, hold on. There's only so many of these things that I can show you at once. Okay, well, while I'm doing that, let me see what you've been talking about. The stream, you have to let me if the stream starts getting a little jerky. I have many things I could do to try to heal the pain of the stream, but you gotta let me know when it's happening, because I only get so much of a notice from... Okay, that didn't work at all. From live stream here. I'm going to do a Q&A after this. If you have some Qs, I might have some As. So definitely keep chatting as you have questions for me about these books. If I don't catch them in my speed round here, I will catch them afterwards. Okay. Here's that aforementioned Lady Baltimore. This started, and I was so into it. It's basically setting up this whole alternate history during World War II where witches and other supernatural elements are on the side of the Nazis, and there's only a certain amount of people who can deal with that, and the Nazis have caught wind of it and are trying to make a preemptive strike with their supernatural elements on these people. That's fun. I've really been into that, but it's kind of getting into this circling the drain thing. I call it rubber banding, where it feels like the same plot beat over and over again. It's like we're fighting the witches, but maybe we're not fighting the witches, but maybe the witches are retreating, but the witches are back. And my neck starts to hurt after a while. I get whiplash. So it's kind of been stuck in that cycle. I think if you like this corner of the Hellboy universe that's like historical fiction, World War II stuff, it's going to hit for you better than me. I'm just generally into Hellboy. I don't exclusively love when it does this stuff. So it's been like the rubber banding is really kind of getting to me. Apparently I put these in the wrong order. Okay. Manifest Destiny. Interesting story about this one. I have been having people recommend this to me for a few years, especially Riley from the Omnibus Collector group, and it's been on my list and on my list. So it recently came back for its final arc. Skybound is really good about letting series get to 50 if they want to. They did it with Birthright, they're doing it here. And I thought, hey, this is the perfect time for me to finally read it. So I decided what I was going to do was read the first arc and then just skip right to the current arc, because that's how comics were when we were younger. We didn't have Marvel Unlimited, DC Universe, all trade paperbacks. You just read what you could read. So I read the first arc, and it's this really interesting story about Lewis and Clark on their adventure through the United States. But not only are they mapping the United States, but they know there are cryptids. There are native cryptids, indigenous cryptids, and they've got to find them and chart them before settlers move west. That's cool. But it gets stuck in some really kind of basic ass horror tropes along the way. And also it has some, I think, kind of regressive scenes with indigenous people that I think just because historically we think maybe it went that way, doesn't mean you can't get a reader or a consultant on the book to like try to update it from every other portrayal we have seen of these scenes in the history of looking at indigenous characters in fiction. And so what happened, I'm sorry I'm over a minute, but oh well. What happened was I read that first 6 and I was kind of like on it. And then I decided to pick up the current arc, and it felt like the current arc just that nothing happened. Like it felt like I went from issue 6 to issue 43 and I had missed nothing. And it had that kind of like kind of make me cringe a little bit portrayal of folks, and I didn't see anything about any kind of like consulting reader, and I kind of was just like, I don't need this book. So now I finally know, and I'm dropping it 6 issues before it ends, but really what I'm dropping is not reading the whole series, which I was thinking of maybe doing. I'm really excited to read this series, The Modern Frankenstein from Heavy Metal by Paul Cornell, because I love Paul Cornell and I love Frankenstein stuff, but it hasn't been on digital yet. I've been searching and searching on Comixology, so I'm really excited to read it when it hits. Here I've got Nuclear Family. This is by Stephanie Phillips, who we've already talked about this episode. I really thought this was going to notch in my top 20 for this year. I don't think she had an ending in her pocket. I don't. It's a really cool story about a family who, it's in the 60s, because the husband's been in the Korean War, and they hear air raid sirens. They think maybe it's just a drill. They go into the basement of their house, and they come out to a nuclear wasteland, and they discover people living underground in this wasteland who are of course mistrustful of this family who shows up out of nowhere who lived, right? But there's time travel elements, there's post-apocalyptic elements, there's a lot of different elements to this. But this final issue kind of takes the perspective of like, it was a dream or something, I don't know. There is some cool thematic stuff about like, is war eternal? Do you ever really leave the theater of war? If you've died in war, is that same anxiety you had in your moment of death just an eternity of anxiety with you stuck in limbo? And that's all cool. And thematically I liked it, but plot-wise, it kind of just felt like it couldn't quite deliver. Phantom on Scan. Bunn is just, I feel like Bunn must just have a what is his name? Dave Bunn, Chris Bunn, Cullen Bunn. He must just have some like nightmares from time to time and sits down and writes them all down, and like 100 comic books come out. He's become the king of indie horror. I like him better than I ever did on superhero stuff. This one, it's a little sparse for me. It's these people, something significant happened to them on the day that a meteor crashed to Earth. So they all have some kind of psychic connection and some kind of powers, and they're struggling with what to do in the modern day with these powers. It's really sparse and atmospheric. If you like that kind of story and you're okay with it kind of being misty and shadowy and stuff like that, then this could work for you, but it's just a little too sparse for me. And the story, I just don't know what it's trying to tell me other than like, these people have powers. Like, I don't really understand where it's going. So it might be a drop. I usually will hang on for all 5 issues at Aftershock, but it's just, I'm not feeling it. This is a great example of how the art does a lot of really different things. So this is one that people has more of a technological power and it looks really different, but I'm just not really feeling it. Can somebody just chime in on the chat? Because I haven't seen any chats for a while and I'm just afraid that I'm speaking to the endless void, even though it says that there are viewers. So somebody just like say, hey, I'm alive. Sea of Stars, I was really thinking about dropping this, but there were only 2 issues left, so I decided to just hang on. The colors are really the reason to show up for this. Rico Renzi, I love his neon purple vision of space so much. It's so cool. But, yeah, I don't know. It's about a kid and his dad. They're transporting some kind of stuff across space. They get separated, and it kind of... Oh, thanks for letting me know you're alive. They kind of get separated, and then they get crossed paths. So the kid is with one group, and the dad's with another group, and then they kind of switch groups, and then they finally come back together in this issue, which should be, like... it should be a rush of emotion. I should really like feel like, wow, we're back together, we did it. And instead it's kind of just like they get in a fight and it's more interested with the things that they found along the way than with the son or the dad. I'm sure they'll get to that in the last issues that are coming up. But it was really a disappointment for me to be waiting for like 2 years for this moment and then to kind of like undersell the moment and have kind of a fight and recriminations. It just didn't feel like it rewarded me for the thing it set up to reward me for. Shadecraft. I was on the verge of a drop of this Henderson and Garbett series. I wasn't even going to read this issue, honestly. And guess what, y'all? It made it happen. It's about this girl. Her brother was in an accident. He's in a coma, and they're caring for him in their home. Keep in mind, I never spoil anything big for you. When I talk about things like this, it's always issues, like things you could have found out in the first few pages of a prior issue. But she's having this experience where she's able to talk to, control, and sometimes be attacked by shadows. But then she finds somebody who's working at her school who knows about it. But she's keeping a secret otherwise. And so it was starting to just feel like it was going to be this like teen book of like, oh, I control shadows. Oh, what are we going to do today? Oh, I made my enemy drop their milk on their blouse. Like it really felt like it was going to go like small ball with the shadow thing. But this issue explodes the scope again, and then explodes the scope bigger. It has so much more to it. The art, of course, Garbett is amazing. But this, I would say, if you've been waiting to check it out, read 1 through 4. And if you're really into it, be into it. And if it hasn't caught you by then, I don't think it's going to get any more interesting than this, but who knows? Okay. Shadow Man, this book this week, Cullen Bunn snuck into my top 10. What are you doing to me, Cullen? This is a Valiant book. I actually really loved Valiant in 2019. 2020 was like, nah. I don't know anything about this hero. I don't care. So he's got a connection to a otherworldly spirit, and which is this guy. The art by John Davis Hunt with colors by Jordi Belair is like unbelievable, mind-blowing, out of this world. Like, cannot possibly recommend it any more highly. It's John Davis Hunt, when he's not colored spectacularly, his stuff can look a little bit flat, but when he's colored spectacularly, the life and the movement really comes through. So Shadow Man's going around and trying to figure out what's the sickness that's in the world with creatures that are crossing over and making a connection with humanity that shouldn't be. Clearly, you don't have to know anything about his history because I'm loving it. It is so much fun, and Bunn is doing this very smart thing where every issue is a one-shot story, and they all work on their own, but they're telling a bigger tale. That is the best way to make this kind of thing work. I'm loving this comic book, Shadow Man. Next up is Something's Killing the Children. This is doing a really interesting thing where you could pick up issue 16 if you have not been reading it so far, because it's doing an origin arc for the main character, and it works even if you have not read the story already. I mean, it's a good story. You can read the story, but you could just pick it up cold with 16. I was concerned that this origin was just going to feel unnecessary, like filler, like, oh, we got to the end of our first arc and our book is really, really popular. Let's figure out something to do. But no, it feels really essential. It's interesting. It's revealing this kind of world of why monsters are real, what it takes to hunt monsters. It's got a lot of mystery baked into it. I think I'm more into it than the present day plot. The art by Werther Deladeira, I can't even say the name. Let me try. Werther Deladeira, and colors by Miquel Muerto is just fantastic. I love that it kind of does these big eyeballs to make everybody's face kind of look out of proportion, but then it's in an otherwise really hyper-realistic world. It lends it that uncanny, unusual quality, and it's just a great book month in, month out. It's fast, though. If you don't like books that are like a fast read, you don't feel like you get your value, then you might not like it. Well, I read Spawn's Universe, and I'm here to report back. I told you last week that I was excited because Todd got an editor recently, and I thought Todd with an editor was pretty good, because the thing I don't like about Spawn is not Spawn, and it's not the story, it's the incoherent writing. Well, the editor, I don't know if they were asleep. I don't know if Todd maybe turned in his script late. Maybe Todd decided to do a pass on the script after it was edited, but we are back to incoherent. And it's so sad because this has so many great ideas about what Spawn is, what he does, why he exists in the world, why there are other Spawns, the forces allied against him, but you cannot make heads or tails of it. I'm not just saying the writing is bad, I'm saying there are grammatical choices here that make the sentences unreadable in the captions. And you could argue that you could just skip the captions. Todd's old school, so he likes to narrate the action. And it's not that he's not saying anything that's not obvious, but he's telling you about what Spawn thinks and feels, which is something I like about old school captions. But this it failed so hard, which is a shame because the art throughout was gorgeous. It was a really engaging story, but you can't enjoy a story when the words are incoherent. All right, I gotta load up my next set of books here, the last set. I think we're gonna make it. So let's see, Michael Boyd, welcome. Happy to hear you here. I'm so happy to hear the rest of you are captivated, and that's why you're not chatting. Although if you have questions you want me to talk about, let me know. Did I read 2012-ish Valiant? I started out reading all of it, and I didn't really love it because it was pretty much all by men. Like the characters were men, the creators were men, the editorial was men, and it just felt like men also from a very similar perspective to each other, and it never really clicked for me. So I actually read like the first arc or two of almost every book, and then I just got fed up. But I started reading it again in 2019, so I was interested in some of the newer books that were coming out, and it was just amazing for me. I think they really kind of like realized what their old limitations were, and they expanded, they tried different perspectives, and it was great. I'm kind of sad that they've been reduced now to just putting out one issue at a time on a kind of unpredictable schedule, because I think Valiant had something really magic with that 2012 restart, especially after it aged into itself for a few years. But unfortunately, you know, market forces outside of just Valiant were into suppressing that. There's only a handful more indie comics. We really are almost at the end here. Star Wars Adventures. Remember last week when we did Star Wars High Republic Adventures and I was like, this is the coolest thing ever. Why isn't everybody reading this? I have the complete opposite reaction to Star Wars Adventures. And let me tell you why. This book has 2 stories per book. It's YA, so that's why it's by IDW and not Marvel. And it's basically it does one story that will be a 2-parter and be across 2 issues, and one that's a standalone story of a villain. Here's the thing. It is impossible to understand what is happening in these stories. It does not tell you who the characters are, what era you're in, what you might know them from. And it's weird to me because it's pitched at kids. My kid loves Star Wars. She's seen a lot of Star Wars, not all of it, but the things that are appropriate for her. And I don't think she would be able to make heads or tails of this. It doesn't tell you who the characters are, why you should know them, and the stories don't communicate that. So it's like this book aimed at young readers, except for it's about media that young readers maybe have seen or not. The stories are not good by themselves. Only if you like squint and go on Wikipedia and like look up where things should happen, sometimes you get something out of it, but it is just an utter failure of imagination of how to make the Star Wars license work for young readers. Nice art though in this issue. In the second story, the first story, that's supposed to be Amidala. There's no likeness. None whatsoever. This was Tales of Terror Quarterly, which was supposed to be out from Xenoscope this week, but wasn't. This is Undiscovered Country, which I dropped. I don't want to get into why. I just don't think Snyder is Snyder and me just don't connect. We never have. I don't think we ever will. So I can't say whether or not you would like it. Which brings us to Vengeance of Valentina. That's more of a Drag Race thing. The Vengeance of Vampirella. I was so hot on this book last week as one of my top picks because I thought something was going to happen. I thought it was going to like really introduce what the end of this universe was going to be. It just didn't get there. I don't know how much else I have to say about it. It just really felt, again, if you're going to build up to something for 19 issues, have a reason that happened. This just really felt repetitive to me. It did not earn, I don't really think it earned the right to be an issue all on its own. And finally, we come to the end of the list with Vinyl. I hated this comic book. Let me tell you why though, because you might like it. It's a very shiny, glossy, silly version of a serial killer, but not just a serial killer who's obsessed with the FBI agent who caught him and is jealous that the FBI agent is embroiled in another investigation. That sounds really cool, right? But it never stops long enough on the killer and his thing, which is that he associates every crime with a song. It never pauses long enough so that we can like love that concept. And also it blends a lot of hyper gore with a lot of kind of silly, funny aspects, which I don't really like. I can do gore, but I don't want to see like neon colors and gore and teddy bears and gore. Like it just doesn't work for me. So I think it's really similar to Nailbiter, but I don't think it really gets to the level that the early Nailbiter got. If you like Nailbiter and you like silly stuff and gore and you like this idea of this FBI agent and the killer that's obsessed with him, you actually will probably like this book. It just, for me, didn't spend enough time cementing the why I care. And that's been something I've been thinking a lot about this week, like books that just don't get all the way there in the why I care aspect. That's really why I drop a book. It's not even because it's good or bad. I read a lot of bad comics that I read because it made me care. So that's really the challenge that I'm having with a lot of these books that I dropped this week, especially in an indie number one. You know, and it's number ones you got to have perfected. You have to really make your sales pitch so hard in a number one to make it land for readers so they keep reading your book. And I just think if you didn't take the time to do that, then like, why am I reading your book? So here's some thoughts about next week. Just a few. I'm limited in what I can pick. 1 DC, 1 Marvel, 2 indie, and then any collections you should be aware of, okay? I'm not even going to put the time wrong because I think this will be pretty quick. Infinite Frontier, DC is a really minor week this week. So they went so hard in the prior week, and I think this is the 5th release week of the month. There is a Catwoman annual written by Ram V, so that's kind of cool, but like I didn't really know what to expect from it, so that's not my pick. This Infinite Frontier Secret Files series has been really fun. Williamson co-writes all of them, but this one is co-written by Dan Waters, who has been, my dislike of Homesick Pilots notwithstanding, one of the most interesting authors of the past couple of years. So I'm really excited, and it's with Psycho Pirate, which I don't really know a lot about, but I think it'll be something interesting. And the first physical collection of these Secret Files is out this week too. So if you buy physical floppies, you can check out what I've been talking about. Marvel, I think my pick of the week is Black Widow. This, I don't think it quite has Natasha's voice right still, but Kelly Thompson has finally got it to a point that I like what's happening for Natasha, and Casagrande's art here is impeccable. Probably the art I'm looking forward to the most every month. My 2 indie books, somebody earlier asked about indie bun horror. Basilisk is one of my favorites right now of his recent crop. I don't even really know how to explain it. There's people with powers. They might be horsemen of the apocalypse. They might be the end of the world. They might be saving it. But this one of them has been cornered by somebody who's suffered past horrors that she's caused, and she's trying to get her on the side of humanity. But was she on the side of humanity already? Who knows or not. Really gorgeous internal art. Just really, really strong series. And I continue to be really loving Dune House Atreides. Whether you've read Dune before, whether you're psyched for the movie, or whether you just want to read like some amazing space sci-fi world building, this has just been a really appealing series, really well written, something I really like. In terms of collections to look out for, not a lot of collections out this week. A lot of reprinted omnibuses, like the Age of Apocalypse omnibus. But Flash is being continued by DC to book 8, Mark Waid's Flash. This pushes us really far into collecting the series. We're into the mid-100s, so it's something to be aware of, because it's kind of as big as an epic collection. So it's really big hunks of Flash. And the other thing to be aware of course, is the first Reign of X trade. This is part of Marvel anthologizing the trades from the X-Men series to collect issues in a manga kind of way, where it just collects whatever was the next sequentially. And a lot of people have really enjoyed reading it that way, because the series really do interrelate. I think it's cool, but there's few lines in comics you could collect that way, and the X-Men line is one. That is the end. Wow, that took a whole episode of talking. So I don't have a special thing to show off this week, because I just knew it was going to go so long that we didn't need that segment. Also, I'm curious to know from those of you both watching it live and who are watching it on replay, is there a better day or time for you? I'd be really looking for a comment from you on that. I've been thinking that maybe it might be better an hour later, because then maybe more people from the West Coast might be able to participate. There's also other days of the week it could be, but I need enough time to read them all. But I also want it to be before the next week of polls. No shade or shame to any channels that don't put their reviews out until a week or more later, but for those of us who do keep up with polls every week, it's like if you're reviewing your books like a week after the week that they were in the poll, it's like I don't need to read a review at that point. My life has moved on. So I really want to get this happening before Tuesday, because DC books come out on Tuesday. Okay. To the extent that I still have a voice, I think I'm going to play a song. I'm going to have to move my microphone because we know that I'm loud, but I'll give my preamble first and then I'll move the microphone. So I have this song called End With Me that is at the beginning of every episode. It's that thing that you hear at the end of the beginning and end of every episode. And it's a full song. I wrote it for a book, actually, that a friend of mine, who you might know because he gets really viral on the internet sometimes, and he's an author and he's a book agent, Eric Smith. His Twitter is Eric Smith Rocks. And he wrote this book called Textual Healing, and he was doing a podcast live read of the book with like a full cast. And I was listening to it because some of my friends were in it. I knew him like vaguely through friends, but I wasn't friends with him. And I just found it really compelling, and I was writing songs about it. So I wrote this song, and I wound up becoming really good friends with Eric. I was in a writing group with him. I played his book release party, and this is one of my favorite songs that then I played with my band. You have to try to listen to my lyrics as I'm singing it. I'll do my best to articulate them, because it sounds like I wrote it about this week's issue of Sword. If you read Sword, I don't want to spoil it for you if you didn't, but there was a very significant final scene with 2 specific characters and a few specific words that relate to who they are and their relationship to each other. And those words are in the song. So as I was reading it, I was like, what? So I just wanted to play the whole thing, and you can finally hear the whole song if you've never gone back and listened to it back when the channel used to be more about music. So thank you so much for sticking around for this whole live chat. It's so much fun. I'm really trying to decide what this should be every week. Is this useful to you? Do you like it? Is it entertaining? Could the format be different? Every suggestion you have made and has been a good suggestion, I have found a way to do. So if you have more suggestions to make, I will find ways to do them. You just need to let me know what I need to be focused on. So let me just get all my screens arranged here, and I will play that song for you, all right? Okay, here we go. I'm moving the microphone. I'm not leaving you because I am loud enough that if we keep the microphone close by, I will make your computer explode when I start singing. So we gotta move it a safe distance. Okay. And the other thing I figured out last week, oh no, I don't know why I just did that. I guess just to give you something to look at while I was away. The other thing I realized last week, which maybe you could have seen as I was playing the song, is I made it so that you couldn't see my guitar, and so I was trying to like scooch up and let you see the guitar. I mean, I do put on pants for this, so I want you to appreciate that I have pants on too. So I'm gonna try to. Ooh, okay, that's probably a little bit better. Plus, you want to sit up and have good posture, and all right, I think that's gonna work. So thanks so much for tuning in. This is End With Me. It's an original song co-written by my bandmates Gina Martinelli, Jake Wilkins, and Zena Perillo. I lost it, remind me, I forgot what I need to find. I don't know if I know the words that will remedy. I cross off each worry and float across the Rubicon. The things I said, I don't mean the words that come out of me. I said, let's pretend, but I need reality. I hope that your voice will suspend me, protect me, wrap it around me, swim for eternity. Well, I'll watch the hours go by and get better. You pack your bags, paint the clouds, paint them red, and then you leave. That's the way story goes. Please won't you stay with me this time, and with me. I say, sugar, to meet you it's sweeter than anything I could have said that was truer. You laugh like you mean it, but I don't mean anything. I can't define it, so I'll just concede it. I'll follow you, float across the Rubicon to find you, to find you, to find you. Well, I'll watch the hours go by and get better. You pack your bags, paint the clouds, paint them red, and then you leave. That's the way your story goes. Please won't you stay with me this time, and with me. It's midnight, I'm writing these words that mean nothing. They cannot measure the distance between you and me and New York. And the clouds, you turn colors. You paint the sky red, then retreat, recede. I follow you, I float across the Rubicon to find you, to find you, to find you, to find you. And I'll watch the hours go by and get better. You pack your bags, paint the clouds, paint them red, and then you leave. That's the way your story goes. Please won't you stay with me this time? Stay with me, please won't you stay with me this time, and with me, and with me. I have to admit, I was getting a little distracted as I played thinking about that scene in Sword. and how this tracks to it. So thanks so much for being a part of the episode of Crushing Comics Live. Leave me your thoughts below. Thanks for being a part of the chat. It's so fun to get to talk about all of the comics of the week with you, and I would love to continue to do so with your feedback. So everybody, take care, and until the next time I get to see you, I hope that you are well.